The fate of dozens of Oklahoma prisoners serving life without parole for murders committed as juveniles hangs in the balance as lawmakers consider whether those sentences are the best answer for such crimes. Courts have ruled that no parole sentences should be used only in the rarest of cases, while advocates for victims say they should remain an option for offenders who they believe are beyond rehabilitation.
Fighting back tears, Angela Wiles appeared before a legislative panel this week, telling them of the pain she and her family experienced following the murder 5 years ago of her 14-year-old daughter, Alyssa.
Not only was she murdered, she was stabbed multiple times to death in her bed in our home.
Alyssa was killed by her 16-year-old former boyfriend, Michael Ray, after she had broken up with him the night before. Ray was tried as an adult and sentenced to life without parole for the crime. District Attorney Jason Hicks, who prosecuted the case, called Ray one of the scariest offenders he's ever dealt with.
He will kill again. A juvenile like that should never see the light of day.
But Ray and more than 40 other prisoners serving life without parole could soon have an opportunity for release, following decisions by the U.S. Supreme Court which limited the application of such sentences for juveniles. The High Court's ruling has left lawmakers wrestling with how to re-sentence teenage offenders, as prosecutors must now prove defendants are irreparably corrupt and permanently incorrigible. But Hicks says they've received no guidance from the court on exactly what those terms mean.
There's no definition of that. I can't explain it to a jury, and I don't want to try to explain it here because there's no legal standard for it at this time. And that's one of the things that we've asked the legislature to come in and do.
On Tuesday, lawmakers heard the testimony of Wiles, Hicks, and others during an interim study requested by State Representative Emily Virgin. The U.S. is currently the only country in the world that allows children under 18 to be sentenced to life without parole. Critics like Jim Smith, the prison ministry's coordinator for the Catholic Archdiocese of Oklahoma, say such sentences are not appropriate because teenagers' brains are still developing.
How many of you have your daily routines dictated to you for the rest of your lives because of the worst thing that you've ever done, by the stupidest thing you ever did, especially when you were a teenager? I pray that you will keep this in mind as you consider legislation in the upcoming session.
Oklahoma Institute for Child Advocacy Executive Director Joe Dorman says no one can assume that teenage killers are beyond redemption.
Some of these kids, at an earlier age with their brain development, they're not lost causes. We have to have the programs in place to try and rehabilitate them and get them back to a productive part of society. We just can't rule out each and every one of these cases that these kids are beyond saving.
Xavier McElrath Bay was once one of those juveniles. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison following his involvement in a gang-related murder at the age of 13.
It was the waking up in that prison cell and knowing in my heart, really truly knowing in my heart that I'm not the same person who had put me there. I cannot even put into words what that means. The reality is that everyone's going to grow up.
But Hicks says that's not true for the victims of such heinous crimes.
These victims didn't ask for a sentence of death. They were given a sentence of death. They're not walking out of the grave in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years. They're dead. They don't get to come back. They don't get a second chance. They don't get a chance at rehabilitation, and they were not given a chance at rehabilitation the day that their lives were taken.
Angela Wiles said her daughter will never have that second chance.
Just like you're unable to determine if they would ever be able to be a better person, we'll never know what she was capable of being. We'll never know, maybe she would have found the cure to cancer. We never know what she would have been. So why do they get the benefit of the doubt?
Rodney Wilson, whose daughter Jeray was murdered by 17-year-old Tucker McGee 6 years ago, told lawmakers he still feels outrage over his loss and the recent resentencing of McGee to life instead of life without parole.
And I haven't got to see her. I haven't got to hear her voice. And then now we go through, seems like every time you turn around, the juvenile is getting a second chance.
Representative Virgin admits those kinds of stories are heart-wrenching.
We hear of the most extreme examples of these cases, the most extreme defendants who don't show any remorse, who don't show any capacity to be rehabilitated, and that's certainly what we heard today. But it's important to remember that there are a lot of other stories out there. There are 43 offenders in prison right now, and each story is different.
Virgin introduced a bill last session to abolish no parole sentences, but it was never heard in the House. She says she intends to file similar legislation when lawmakers return to the Capitol next year.